The cardboard beneath Marcus Williams was already soaked through when he saw her. Rain hammered the concrete overpass where he'd taken shelter, each drop echoing like gunshots in the hollow space beneath the bridge. His fingers, numb from the December cold, clutched the only thing standing between him and hypothermia: a threadbare wool blanket his sister had given him 3 years ago, back when she still answered his calls. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Across the narrow walkway, curled against a concrete pillar, lay a girl who couldn't have been more than 16. Her designer jacket, now drenched and torn at the sleeve, clung to her small frame. Her dark hair was matted against her pale cheek, and her lips had taken on a frightening blue tint. She wasn't moving. Marcus had learned the hard way that the streets taught you to look away, to mind your own survival. But something about the way she lay there, so still, so vulnerable, reminded him of another girl, another time, when he'd chosen wrong and lived with the consequences ever since. Without thinking, he pulled himself to his feet, every joint protesting the movement. The blanket felt impossibly heavy in his hands as he crossed the short distance between them. For a moment, he hesitated. This blanket was his lifeline, his only protection against the brutal winter that stretched endlessly ahead. Giving it away might mean he wouldn't see morning. But then she shivered, a barely perceptible tremor that cut through his doubt like a blade. Marcus knelt beside her and gently draped the wool over her motionless form, tucking it carefully around her shoulders. She didn't wake, but her breathing seemed to steady slightly. "Stay warm, kid," he whispered, then retreated to his cardboard, pulling his thin jacket tighter around himself. The cold bit into him immediately, sharper now without his only barrier. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about how many hours until dawn. The first thing Elena Hartwell felt was warmth, not the artificial heat of her penthouse suite or the controlled climate of her father's corporate offices, but something softer, more human. She opened her eyes slowly, confusion clouding her vision as she tried to piece together where she was and why everything hurt. The events of the previous night came flooding back in fragments. The screaming match with her father about the arranged engagement to the son of his business partner. The way he'd dismissed her dreams of studying art instead of business. The cruel words about her dead mother, about how disappointment seemed to run in the family. She'd run out of the mansion in tears, with nothing but her jacket and the emergency credit card she kept hidden in her pocket. But the card had been declined at the hotel, frozen, just like her father had threatened. She'd wandered the streets for hours, finally collapsing under this bridge, when exhaustion and despair overwhelmed her. The last thing she remembered was the bitter cold seeping into her bones. Now, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of coffee and something indefinably comforting, she sat up slowly. Across from her, hunched against the concrete wall, was a man who looked like he'd been carved from hardship itself. His clothes were layered but thin, his beard streaked with premature gray, and his hands were wrapped around his knees in a futile attempt to conserve body heat. Elena pulled the blanket tighter around herself, then stopped. This wasn't her blanket. This man, this stranger who clearly had nothing, had given her his only protection against the cold. She could see him shivering, his lips pressed tight to keep his teeth from chattering. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice hoarse from crying and cold. "Is this yours?" Marcus looked up, surprised to see her awake. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, ringed with exhaustion but alert. Alive. Relief flooded through him. "You're okay," he said, and she could hear genuine concern in his voice. "I was worried you might not wake up." "This blanket," Elena insisted, starting to unwrap it from her shoulders. "It's yours, isn't it? You gave it to me." Marcus held up a hand, shaking his head. "Keep it. You need it more than I do." "No, I don't." Elena's voice was stronger now, more insistent. "Look at you. You're freezing." For the first time in months, Marcus almost smiled. "Lady, I've been freezing for 3 years. One more night won't kill me." But Elena was already moving, scooting across the concrete until she was beside him. Without asking permission, she spread the blanket wide and draped it over both their shoulders, creating a shared cocoon of warmth. Marcus tensed, every instinct telling him to pull away. People didn't get close to him anymore. People crossed the street to avoid him, but the cold was brutal, and the warmth radiating from the shared blanket was impossible to resist. "I'm Elena," she said quietly, settling beside him with careful distance but determined kindness. Marcus. He kept his eyes fixed on the rain outside their shelter. And you shouldn't be here. This isn't a safe place for someone like you. Elena almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Someone like me? You mean someone whose father controls every aspect of her life? Someone who can't even order a coffee without it being reported back to the family board? Someone who's apparently so worthless that her own father would rather she disappear than embarrass the family name? The bitterness in her voice caught Marcus off guard. He'd assumed she was just another rich kid, slumming it, playing at rebellion before running back to her comfortable life. But there was real pain in her words, a kind of hurt he recognized. Rough night? He asked. Rough life, Elena corrected, though I'm guessing you know something about that. They sat in silence for a while, watching the rain create rivers in the street beyond their shelter. Marcus found himself stealing glances at his unexpected companion. She was beautiful, even disheveled and exhausted, but there was something else there too, a sadness that seemed too heavy for someone so young. How long have you been out here? Elena asked eventually. 3 years, 2 months, 16 days. The precision of his answer surprised them both. Elena turned to look at him fully. You keep count? Marcus shrugged. Hard not to. Every day you survive is a victory, even if it doesn't feel like one. What happened? If you don't mind me asking. For a moment Marcus was quiet. He never talked about before. The people on the streets, they understood that everyone had a story. And most of those stories were too painful to share. But something about Elena, about the way she'd insisted on sharing the blanket, made him want to answer. I was a paramedic, he said finally. Worked for the city for 8 years. Good job, good benefits, apartment in a decent neighborhood. I even had a fiancée, Sarah. We were planning our wedding. Elena waited, sensing there was more. One night, we got a call. Multi-car accident on the freeway. When we arrived, there was this little girl, maybe 7 years old, trapped in the backseat of one of the cars. The front end was completely crushed, and we could smell gas. Everyone was screaming at us to get her out. Marcus's voice grew quieter, more distant. But protocol said to wait for the fire department to secure the scene. The car was unstable, and if it shifted, anyone inside could be crushed. My partner, he wanted to wait, but I could see the terror in that little girl's eyes, and she reminded me so much of my sister when we were kids. Elena felt her chest tighten as she anticipated where this story was going, so I went in anyway. Ignored protocol, ignored my partner's warnings. I got her out, and for about 30 seconds, I was a hero. Until the car shifted and my partner, who'd come in after me to help, got pinned underneath. The words hung heavy in the cold air between them. He didn't die, Marcus continued quickly, but his spine was crushed. He'll never walk again. The department fired me for violating protocol. Sarah left because she couldn't handle the guilt, and the preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Shame. And the girl's family, they sued me for emotional trauma because I'd scared her during the rescue. Elena stared at him in disbelief. But you saved her life. Doesn't matter. I broke the rules, and someone got hurt because of it. Lost my job, lost my apartment when I couldn't pay rent, lost my benefits so I couldn't afford therapy or medication for the PTSD. One bad decision, and everything just collapsed. That's not a bad decision, Elena said fiercely. That's being human. That's seeing a child in danger and acting on your instincts to help. Marcus looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't expected. Not pity, but understanding, as if she knew what it felt like to be punished for doing what felt right. What about you? He asked. What's your story? Elena was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer. Before she died, she made me promise that I'd live my own life, not the one someone else planned for me. She was an artist, you know. Painted these incredible landscapes that made you feel like you could step right into them. My father hated it, called it a waste of time and talent. She pulled the blanket tighter around both of them. After she died, my father threw away all her paintings. Said they were too painful to look at. Then he sent me to boarding school, and when I came back he had my whole life mapped out. The right schools, the right friends, the right career path in his company, and now, the right husband. Arranged marriage? Marcus asked, though he could guess the answer. Elena nodded miserably. To consolidate his business interests. He doesn't care that I barely know the guy, or that I want to study art like my mother. He says I'm being selfish and childish, that family means sacrifice. But what he really means is that I'm supposed to sacrifice everything so he can get richer. So you ran. So I ran, she confirmed. Like a coward, like a spoiled brat who can't handle real life. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know what I think?" Elena looked at him expectantly. "I think you're brave as hell." She blinked in surprise. Brave? I'm sitting under a bridge, soaking wet, hiding from my problems. You're 18 years old, and you walked away from a life of luxury because you wanted something real, something true to who you are. Most people spend their whole lives wishing they had that kind of courage. Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes, but for the first time in hours they weren't tears of despair. "The girl," she said suddenly, "the one you saved. What happened to her?" Marcus smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "She's in college now, pre-med. She sent me a letter about 2 years ago. Tracked me down through the department somehow. Said she wanted to be a doctor because a paramedic once showed her that sometimes breaking the rules is the right thing to do. She found you here?" "No. This was back when I still had an address. Before everything fell apart completely. But that letter is the only thing I kept when I lost the apartment." Elena watched as Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn soft from handling. Even in the dim light she could see it had been read many times. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Why did you give me your blanket? You don't know me. You had no reason to help." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the rain. "Because I failed someone once by hesitating, and I swore I'd never do that again. And because—" He paused, meeting her eyes. "Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to save someone else first." They sat in comfortable silence after that, sharing warmth and something deeper than either of them had expected to find on a cold December night. Elena found herself studying Marcus's profile, seeing past the rough exterior to the man underneath. He had kind eyes, she realized, the kind that had seen too much pain but hadn't hardened completely. "Marcus," she said eventually, "I have an idea." He looked at her warily. In his experience, ideas from strangers rarely ended well for him. "What if I told you I could help you get back on your feet? Get you into housing, maybe even help you find work? I'd say you're sweet, but naive. People like me don't get second chances. And people like you don't really know how the world works for people like me." Elena smiled then, a mischievous glint in her storm-gray eyes. "What if I told you that might not be as impossible as you think?" Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the sound of footsteps echoed under the bridge. Heavy, purposeful steps accompanied by the crackle of radio static. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, sweeping back and forth across their shelter. "Elena Hartwell," a voice called out, official and urgent. "Are you under here? Your father sent us to find you." Elena's face went pale. "Security," she whispered to Marcus. "My father's people." Marcus started to pull away from the blanket, but Elena grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said urgently. "Whatever happens, don't apologize for helping me. Don't let them make you feel like you did something wrong." The footsteps were getting closer now, and Marcus could see the beams of high-powered flashlights dancing across the concrete walls. He'd dealt with security guards before, usually when they were moving him along from somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. This felt different, more intense. "Elena!" The voice was closer now, maybe 20 feet away. "Your father is very worried. He just wants to make sure you're safe." Elena stood up slowly, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. "I'm here," she called out, her voice steady despite the fear Marcus could see in her eyes. 2 men in dark suits appeared at the mouth of their shelter, flashlights trained on Elena and Marcus. They looked like corporate security, clean-cut and professional, but Marcus could see the judgment in their eyes as they took in his appearance. "Miss Hartwell," the taller of the two men said, relief evident in his voice. "Your father has been looking for you all night. Are you injured?" "I'm fine, Roberts," Elena replied, and Marcus could hear the authority creeping into her voice. This was a different Elena than the scared girl who'd been crying under the bridge. Roberts's eyes shifted to Marcus, and his expression hardened. "Did this man hurt you in any way, miss? Did he touch you or threaten you?" "No," Elena said firmly. "He helped me. He gave me his blanket when I was cold." The second security guard, shorter but broader, stepped forward. "Sir, we're going to need you to stand up slowly and keep your hands where we can see them." Marcus complied, rising carefully to his feet. He knew the drill. Don't make sudden movements, don't give them an excuse to escalate the situation. "He didn't do anything wrong," Elena said, her voice rising slightly. "He saved my life." "Miss Hartwell," Roberts said patiently, "you've been through a traumatic experience. Sometimes in situations like this, people can develop a false sense of gratitude toward—" "Don't," Elena interrupted, her voice sharp with anger. "Don't you dare minimize what happened here, or what this man did for me." Marcus watched in amazement as Elena transformed before his eyes. Gone was the vulnerable girl who'd shared his blanket. In her place stood someone who clearly knew how to command respect, someone who'd been raised in a world where her word carried weight. "Roberts," she continued, "call my father and tell him I'm coming home. But I'm bringing a guest." The two security guards exchanged glances. "Miss, I don't think that's—" "I don't care what you think," Elena said coolly. "Marcus saved my life tonight. The least we can do is offer him a hot meal and a warm place to sleep." Marcus shook his head. "Elena, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she said, turning to him with determination in her eyes. "You gave me your blanket when you had nothing else to give. You shared your story with me, made me feel less alone. Let me do this." Roberts stepped forward diplomatically. "Miss Hartwell, your father specifically instructed us to bring you home immediately. He's very concerned about your welfare. Then he'll be happy to know that I'm safe, and that I'm coming home with someone who helped ensure that safety." Elena's voice brooked no argument. "Call him, Roberts. Tell him exactly what I said." The security guard reluctantly reached for his radio, speaking in low tones that Marcus couldn't quite make out. After a few minutes of back and forth, Roberts turned back to them. "Your father agrees to see you both," he said carefully. "But he wants to meet with you privately first, Miss Hartwell." Elena nodded. "That's fine. Marcus, will you come with us?" Marcus looked at her, then at the two imposing security guards, then back at Elena. Every survival instinct he'd developed over the past 3 years was screaming at him to walk away, to disappear back into the shadows where he belonged. Rich people and their problems were nothing but trouble for someone like him. But there was something in Elena's eyes, a plea that went beyond words. She needed him to trust her, the way she'd trusted him when she'd shared his blanket. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll come." The ride to Elena's house was surreal. Marcus sat in the back of a sleek black SUV, still wrapped in his threadbare clothes, watching the city pass by through tinted windows. Elena sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm in a gesture of solidarity. She'd insisted he keep the blanket. As they drove through increasingly affluent neighborhoods, Marcus began to understand exactly who Elena's father was. The houses grew larger, the lawns more manicured, the security more visible, when they finally pulled through a set of imposing iron gates and up a circular driveway. Marcus felt his heart sink. The house, mansion really, stretched out before them like something from a movie. 3 stories of pristine white stone, with columns that belonged in ancient Greece, and windows that glowed warmly from within. This wasn't just wealth. This was the kind of generational money that built empires. "Elena," Marcus said quietly as the SUV came to a stop, "what exactly does your father do?" Elena looked at him with an expression that was part apology, part determination. "He's the CEO of Hartwell Industries. We manufacture medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, things like that." Marcus felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. Hartwell Industries was one of the largest corporations in the country. He'd seen their logo in every hospital he'd ever worked in, on everything from defibrillators to basic surgical supplies. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because it doesn't matter," Elena said firmly. "Not for what happened tonight. You didn't help me because of who my father is. You helped me because it was the right thing to do." The car door opened, and Roberts gestured for them to exit. Elena got out first, then turned to help Marcus. As they walked toward the massive front doors, Marcus couldn't help but feel like he was approaching the gates of a different world entirely. The doors opened before they reached them, revealing a man who could only be Elena's father. Richard Hartwell was tall and imposing, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. His expensive suit was immaculate despite the late hour, and his eyes, the same storm gray as Elena's, were fixed on Marcus, with an expression that was impossible to read. "Elena," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Thank God you're safe." Elena walked directly to her father and hugged him, surprising Marcus with the genuine relief on both their faces. Whatever their differences, it was clear they loved each other. "Dad," Elena said, pulling back but keeping her hands on his arms. "This is Marcus Williams. He's the reason I'm standing here right now." Richard Hartwell's eyes shifted to Marcus, taking in every detail of his appearance. Marcus forced himself to stand straight, to meet the man's gaze directly. He had nothing to be ashamed of. "Mr. Williams," Richard said, extending his hand. "My daughter says I owe you a debt of gratitude." Marcus shook the offered hand, surprised by the firmness of the grip and the apparent sincerity in the man's voice. "I just did what anyone would do, sir." "No," Richard said quietly. "You did what very few people would do. Please come inside. We have a great deal to discuss." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior, but Marcus barely noticed the artwork or the marble floors. His attention was focused on the man leading them through the halls, trying to reconcile this concerned father with the corporate titan Elena had described. Richard led them to what was clearly his study, a room lined with books and dominated by a massive desk. He gestured for them to sit in comfortable leather chairs while he remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "Elena," he said, "I want you to know that I've been out of my mind with worry. When Roberts called to say you were missing—" "I'm sorry, Dad," Elena interrupted. "I know I scared you. But I needed time to think, to figure out what I wanted to say to you." Richard nodded slowly. "About the engagement. About your future." "About my life," Elena corrected. "About whether I get to live it, or whether it's just going to be another asset for Hartwell Industries to manage." Marcus watched the exchange, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. This was clearly a private family matter, and he had no business being here. But Elena had insisted, and something told him she had a reason. "Mr. Williams," Richard said, turning his attention to Marcus. "My daughter tells me you saved her life tonight. Is that how you would describe what happened?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "Your daughter was in a dangerous situation. She was cold, wet, and alone, in an area of the city that isn't safe at night. I did what I could to help. By giving her your blanket." "Yes, sir." Richard studied him for a long moment. "Elena also tells me that you're currently homeless. Is that correct?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his voice steady. "That's correct, sir." "And you're a former paramedic?" "Yes, sir." Richard walked around his desk and sat down, pulling out a folder that Marcus realized with a sinking feeling must contain information about him. Of course, a man like Richard Hartwell would have resources to investigate someone within hours. "According to my sources," Richard said, opening the folder, "you were dismissed from the City Emergency Services 3 years ago for violating protocol during a rescue operation. The incident resulted in permanent injury to your partner." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's correct." "You were also sued by the family of the child you rescued, though that case was eventually dismissed." "Also correct." Richard closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about that night, Mr. Williams. In your own words." Marcus glanced at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. So he told the story again, the same way he told it to Elena under the bridge. He didn't try to justify his actions or minimize the consequences. He just told the truth. When he finished, Richard was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "The child you rescued, what was her name?" "Jessica Chen," Marcus replied without hesitation. Richard nodded slowly. "And she's in medical school now?" Marcus blinked in surprise. "How did you?" "Because Jessica Chen is currently a second-year student at Johns Hopkins, and she's one of our scholarship recipients. Every year, Hartwell Industries provides funding for promising medical students who demonstrate exceptional character and commitment to helping others. Marcus stared at him, speechless. Her application essay, Richard continued, was about a paramedic who taught her that sometimes the most important thing you can do is act with your heart, even when the rules say otherwise. She credited that experience with inspiring her to pursue medicine. Elena looked between her father and Marcus, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Mr. Williams," Richard said, standing up from his desk, "I want to offer you a job." Marcus felt like the world had tilted on its axis. "Sir, I don't understand. Our company has a crisis response team that handles emergency situations at our facilities worldwide. Industrial accidents, natural disasters, situations that require someone who can think quickly and act decisively under pressure. Someone who prioritizes human life over protocol." Marcus shook his head. "Mr. Hartwell, with all due respect, I haven't worked in 3 years. I don't have current certifications. I don't have references." "You have something more valuable than any of that," Richard interrupted. "You have proven character. You gave my daughter your blanket when you had nothing else to give. You shared your food, your shelter, your story. You protected her when you had no reason to trust that it wouldn't come back to hurt you." Elena reached over and took Marcus's hand. "Dad," she said quietly, "there's something else you should know. Marcus isn't just someone who helped me tonight. He's someone who reminded me why it's important to fight for what you believe in, even when it's hard." Richard looked at his daughter with new attention. "Elena, I want to study art, Dad. I want to honor Mom's memory by creating something beautiful in the world, not by marrying someone I don't love to expand your business empire." Richard's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, frustration, and finally, something that might have been pride. "And you think Mr. Williams taught you this?" "I think Marcus showed me what it looks like to sacrifice for someone else without expecting anything in return. I think he showed me what real courage looks like." Elena's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "And I think maybe, if we're very lucky, we can show him what it looks like when good people get the second chances they deserve." Richard looked at Marcus for a long moment, then at his daughter, then back at Marcus. "Mr. Williams, the job I'm offering comes with full benefits, including housing assistance and medical coverage. It also comes with training to update your certifications and skills." Marcus felt overwhelmed, like he was drowning in possibility. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do this for someone like me?" "Because," Richard said simply, "someone like you gave his blanket to my daughter when she needed it most. And because I've spent so many years focused on building a business that I forgot the most important thing my wife ever taught me. That the measure of a person isn't what they accumulate, but what they're willing to give away." Elena squeezed Marcus's hand. "What do you say?" Marcus looked around the opulent study. At the man offering him a future he'd never dared to hope for. At the girl who'd shared his blanket and somehow changed both their lives in the process. "I say," he said quietly, "that sometimes the best things happen when you stop trying to protect yourself and start trying to protect someone else." 6 months later, Marcus stood in his new apartment, looking out the window at the city sprawling below. The place was small but clean, with actual furniture and a refrigerator that stayed stocked with food. On his dresser sat a framed photo of him and Elena at her art school graduation, both of them grinning widely in the sunshine. The job at Hartwell Industries had been everything Richard had promised and more. Marcus led a team of emergency responders who traveled to company facilities around the world, training staff and managing crisis situations. He'd been to 3 countries in the past 6 months, had saved 2 lives, and had helped prevent a chemical spill that could have devastated an entire community. But more than that, he'd found purpose again. Every morning when he put on his uniform, he thought about the little girl under the bridge who'd reminded him that sometimes breaking the rules was the right thing to do. His phone buzzed with a text message from Elena. "Gallery opening tonight. You better be there, blanket boy." Marcus smiled. Elena had thrived at art school, creating paintings that somehow captured the same warmth and hope she'd brought to his life that cold December night. Her first solo show was opening tonight, and Marcus wouldn't miss it for the world. As he got ready to leave for the gallery, Marcus's eyes fell on the worn wool blanket folded carefully on his bed. He'd offered to return it to Elena many times, but she'd always refused. "That blanket saved my life," she'd told him. "It deserves a place of honor." Marcus picked up the blanket and held it for a moment, remembering the scared girl who'd shared it with him, the warmth they'd created together, the moment when both their lives had changed forever. Then he set it back down and headed out into the evening, ready to celebrate new beginnings, and the strange, wonderful way that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. At the gallery, surrounded by Elena's vibrant paintings and the warmth of friends who'd become family, Marcus realized that he'd learned something important that night under the bridge. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to save someone else first. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, saving someone else saves you both. The centerpiece of Elena's show was a painting titled "Warmth in Winter," an image of two figures sharing a blanket under a bridge, rendered in colors that somehow made even that cold, harsh place look like home. At the bottom, in small, elegant script, were the words, "For Marcus, who taught me that love isn't about what you have, but what you're willing to give away." And in the corner of the gallery, Richard Hartwell stood watching his daughter laugh with the man who'd saved her life, understanding finally that the greatest success wasn't measured in dollars or market share, but in the lives you touch and the love you choose to share. The weeks following Marcus's hiring were a whirlwind of activity that felt both surreal and overwhelming. Richard had been true to his word about comprehensive training, enrolling Marcus in an intensive certification program that would bring his emergency medical skills up to current standards. The classes were held at a private training facility owned by Hartwell Industries, where Marcus found himself learning alongside other professionals who treated him with the respect he'd almost forgotten he deserved. Dr. Sarah Chen, the program director, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd spent 20 years in emergency medicine before transitioning to corporate training. On Marcus's first day, she'd looked at his file and said simply, "I know who you are and what happened. What I care about is who you are now and what you're going to do with this opportunity." The training was intensive, covering everything from advanced life support to hazardous materials response. Marcus threw himself into the coursework with a dedication that surprised even him. For the first time in 3 years, he had a reason to push himself, to be better than he was the day before. His classmates were an interesting mix. There was David Rodriguez, a former Marine medic, who'd struggled with PTSD after his discharge. Jennifer Walsh, a nurse who'd left her hospital job after a malpractice lawsuit that wasn't her fault but had destroyed her confidence. Tom Bradley, a fire department captain who'd been forced into early retirement after an injury. Each of them carried their own version of professional exile, their own stories of systems that had failed them. What struck Marcus most was how Dr. Chen treated them not as damaged goods being recycled, but as experienced professionals being given a chance to apply their skills in a new context. She pushed them hard, demanded excellence, and never once made them feel like charity cases. "You're not here because someone felt sorry for you," she told the class during their first week. "You're here because real-world experience, including real-world failure, creates better emergency responders than any textbook ever could." Meanwhile, Elena was navigating her own transformation. Her decision to pursue art had created ripples throughout the social circles she'd grown up in. Friends who'd known her since childhood suddenly treated her differently, as if choosing passion over profit was a contagious disease they might catch. The engagement to William Thornton III had been officially called off, much to the relief of everyone except the two families who'd orchestrated it. William, it turned out, had been as reluctant as Elena about the arrangement and was quietly grateful for an excuse to pursue his own interests in environmental law. But Elena's real challenge came from within her father's company. Board members who'd grown accustomed to thinking of her as a future asset began questioning Richard's judgment in allowing his daughter to waste her potential on art school. There were whispered conversations about succession planning and whether Richard was becoming too sentimental to make hard business decisions. Richard found himself fighting battles on multiple fronts. He'd publicly supported both Elena's career change and Marcus's hiring, but the corporate world was less forgiving than he'd anticipated. Competitors spread rumors about Hartwell Industries becoming a charity organization, rather than a serious business. Stock prices fluctuated based on speculation about the company's new direction. The pressure came to a head during a particularly brutal board meeting 6 weeks after Marcus started his training. Harold Pemberton, the longest-serving board member and Richard's former mentor, stood up during the quarterly review and addressed the room with barely concealed frustration. "Richard," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years in corporate leadership, "I've known you since you were Elena's age, and I've watched you build this company into what it is today. But this recent trend toward emotional decision-making is concerning to all of us." Richard remained calm, though Elena, who was observing from the back of the room as part of her business education, could see the tension in his shoulders. "Which decisions are you referring to, Harold?" "Hiring a homeless man to lead our crisis response team, allowing your daughter to abandon her responsibilities to the company, making business decisions based on sentiment rather than sound judgment." Pemberton's words were measured but sharp. "The market is watching us, Richard. Our shareholders are asking questions." Richard stood slowly, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Harold, let me ask you something. What was our response time to the chemical leak at the Houston facility last month?" Pemberton looked confused by the apparent change of subject. "I'm not sure of the exact—" 4 hours and 23 minutes, Richard interrupted. 4 hours and 23 minutes from initial alert to full containment. Do you know what our average response time was before Marcus Williams took over crisis management? Several board members shifted uncomfortably. They could sense where this was going. 11 hours and 47 minutes, Richard continued. Marcus's team has reduced our emergency response time by more than half, prevented 3 potential disasters, and saved the company an estimated $47 million in potential liability and cleanup costs. He moved to the presentation screen and pulled up a chart showing response statistics. As for the market watching us, our safety ratings have improved by 30% since implementing Marcus's protocols. Our insurance premiums have dropped accordingly, and our reputation for corporate responsibility has never been stronger. Elena watched her father with growing admiration. This was a side of him she'd rarely seen, the CEO who'd built an empire not just through ruthless business sense, but through understanding that good business and good ethics weren't mutually exclusive. "But what about the homeless aspect?" Another board member, Patricia Mills, interjected. "What kind of message does it send when we hire people off the street?" Richard's expression hardened slightly. "It sends the message that we value character and capability over circumstance and credentials. Marcus Williams was homeless because he made a split-second decision to save a child's life, knowing it might cost him his career. That's exactly the kind of judgment I want leading our emergency response." He clicked to another slide showing employee satisfaction surveys. "Morale in our crisis response division has improved by 60% since Marcus took over. Turnover has dropped to nearly 0. Our people trust him because they know he puts human life above corporate liability." Elena felt a surge of pride watching her father defend not just Marcus, but the principles she'd been trying to get him to see for years. The man who'd once dismissed her mother's art as frivolous was now arguing passionately for the value of looking beyond surface appearances. Harold Pemberton wasn't finished. "And what about Elena? What message does it send when the CEO's daughter abandons her responsibility to the family business?" This time, Elena stood up before her father could respond. She'd been silent long enough. "Mr. Pemberton," she said, her voice clear and confident, "may I ask what you think my responsibility to this company actually is?" Pemberton looked surprised to be addressed directly by someone he still thought of as a child. "Well, as Richard's daughter, your responsibility is to prepare yourself to eventually take leadership of Hartwell Industries, to ensure the family legacy continues." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "And do you think the best way to ensure this company's legacy is to force unwilling family members into leadership positions they're not suited for?" "You're perfectly suited for leadership, Elena. You have the education, the background, but not the passion," Elena interrupted gently. "Mr. Pemberton, with respect, I've spent my entire life in this world. I know these boardrooms, these strategies, these quarterly reports. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that I would be a mediocre CEO at best, because my heart isn't in it." She moved toward the presentation screen, her confidence growing. "But let me tell you what I have learned from studying art, from choosing my own path. I've learned to see things differently, to find solutions that aren't obvious, to create value where others see waste." Elena pulled up her phone and connected it to the presentation system. On the screen appeared images of her latest paintings, but these weren't just artistic expressions. They were detailed studies of color, light, and emotional response. "I've been working with the marketing department on a new campaign for our medical equipment division," she said. "Traditional medical advertising focuses on technical specifications and clinical efficiency. But my research into color psychology and emotional response has shown that patients and families make healthcare decisions based on trust and comfort, not just statistics." The screen showed mock-ups of advertisements that used Elena's artistic insights to present Hartwell's products in ways that emphasized human connection and healing rather than cold technical superiority. "These test campaigns have shown a 43% increase in positive emotional response compared to our traditional marketing approach," Elena continued. "Because sometimes the best way to sell life-saving equipment is to remind people that behind every machine is a human being who wants to go home to their family." The boardroom was silent as the implications sank in. Elena had found a way to apply her artistic training to create real business value, but on her own terms, in her own way. Richard looked at his daughter with something approaching awe. This wasn't the rebellious teenager who'd run away from an arranged marriage. This was a young woman who'd found her own path and was using it to make meaningful contributions. "Furthermore," Elena said, clicking to a final slide, "I'll be conducting workshops for our international teams on cross-cultural communication and emotional intelligence. Because art doesn't just teach you to create beauty. It teaches you to understand how different people see the world differently and how to communicate across those differences." She looked directly at Harold Pemberton. "So yes, I've abandoned the path you set for me. But I haven't abandoned my responsibility to this company or to my family. I've just redefined what that responsibility looks like." Patricia Mills leaned forward. "These are impressive results, Elena. But can we count on this artistic approach for long-term strategic planning?" Before Elena could respond, Richard's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He glanced at it, and his expression changed immediately. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but we're about to see Marcus's approach in action. There's been an explosion at our manufacturing facility in Denver. Multiple injuries, potential chemical exposure, and the local emergency services are overwhelmed." He stood up. "Marcus and his team are already en route. This is exactly the kind of situation where having someone who prioritizes human life over protocol makes the difference between a manageable crisis and a catastrophe." The boardroom fell silent as the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't theoretical anymore. Real people were in danger, and the man they'd been questioning was racing toward that danger to help them. Elena felt her heart clench with worry for Marcus, but also with a fierce pride. This was who he was, who he'd always been, someone who ran toward danger when others needed help. Consequences be damned. Richard looked around the room at the faces of his board members. "I suggest we table this discussion until we see how our crisis response team handles this emergency, because that will tell us everything we need to know about the value of giving good people second chances." As if on cue, Richard's phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's number. "Richard?" Marcus's voice came through the speaker, slightly distorted by distance and urgency. "We're on site in Denver. The situation is stabilized, and we've successfully evacuated all personnel. No fatalities, 3 minor injuries being treated by local paramedics. The chemical containment held, so there's no environmental threat." The relief in the room was palpable. "Marcus," Richard said, "how long from initial alert to containment?" 2 hours and 14 minutes, Marcus replied. "Could have been faster, but we had to coordinate with local fire department and wait for hazmat clearance." Richard looked at Harold Pemberton meaningfully. 2 hours and 14 minutes. Their old average had been nearly 12 hours. "Outstanding work, Marcus. Get your team home safely." "Will do. Oh, and Richard? Tell Elena her safety protocols for the art storage areas probably saved us another hour of evacuation time." Having clear visual markers for emergency routes made all the difference. Elena blinked in surprise. She'd completely forgotten about the consultation work she'd done on facility safety signage, applying principles of visual communication to make emergency information more intuitive. After Marcus hung up, the boardroom remained quiet for a long moment. Finally, Harold Pemberton cleared his throat. "Well," he said grudgingly, "I suppose those are the kind of results that are hard to argue with." Patricia Mills nodded slowly. Perhaps we've been too focused on conventional approaches to leadership and problem-solving. Richard smiled, but it was Elena who spoke next. The point isn't that unconventional approaches are always better, she said thoughtfully. The point is that the best solutions often come from people who've experienced failure, who've been broken and rebuilt themselves, who understand that sometimes the rules need to change. She looked around the room at faces that were finally beginning to understand. Marcus didn't become a better crisis manager, despite being homeless. He became a better crisis manager because being homeless taught him what it really means when everything falls apart. And sometimes you need someone who's been to the bottom to know how to keep others from falling. As the board meeting concluded, Elena found herself thinking about the strange journey that had brought them all to this point. A year ago, she'd been a frightened teenager running away from a life she didn't want. Marcus had been a broken man sleeping under bridges. Her father had been so focused on building his empire that he'd almost lost sight of why it mattered. Now they were all something different, something better. Not because they'd avoided failure, but because they'd learned to transform it into something meaningful. Later that evening, when Marcus returned from Denver, he found Elena and Richard waiting for him in the lobby of the company headquarters. Elena ran to him immediately, throwing her arms around him in a hug that surprised them both. "I was so worried," she said, pulling back to look at him, "when Dad said there was an explosion." "Hey," Marcus said gently, "this is what I do, remember? This is what I'm good at." Richard approached them, his expression serious but warm. "Marcus, I want you to know that the board received a full report on today's response time and the lives you saved. There are no more questions about your qualifications or your value to this company." Marcus nodded, but Elena could see that his satisfaction came not from corporate approval, but from knowing he'd helped people who needed it. "There's something else," Richard continued. "The board has approved a significant expansion of the Crisis Response Division. We want to offer these services to other companies, other communities. We want to build something that can help people beyond just our own facilities." Elena watched Marcus's face light up with possibility. This was bigger than just a job, bigger than just a second chance. This was an opportunity to build something that could prevent other people from falling through the cracks the way he had. "What do you think?" Richard asked. Marcus looked at Elena, then at Richard, then back at Elena. "I think," he said slowly, "that sometimes the best way to save yourself is to build something that saves other people too." And in that moment, standing in the gleaming lobby of Hartwell Industries, surrounded by the evidence of second chances and transformed lives, they all understood that the real measure of success wasn't what you built for yourself, but what you built for others to build upon. The homeless man who'd given his blanket to a stranger had become the foundation for something larger than any of them had imagined. And the scared girl who'd run away from her family's expectations had become the bridge between two worlds, showing them all that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is choose love over fear, hope over cynicism, and possibility over the way things have always been done. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.